So in this video we will be talking about use context. The use context is a hook that accepts context object and the value that is returned from react.createContext, and then it returns the current context value for that context. This is a little not complicated, but it's just simple. Now let me explain how it works. So the hook gives functional components easy access to your React app context, meaning all of your components and the props that are passed through the components from the top to bottom flows like a waterfall. So it has to go through all the components, and if your app is huge and if there is depth, then that will become a problem. So basically use context hook works like a React context API, which is a way to share data deeply throughout your app without needing to manually pass your app props down through various levels. Now the use context makes using context a little easier. So let's go right ahead and start doing it. And before I explain how we can use context, I will show you what create context is, and then we can head over to use context and we can apply it there. So first let's create a const number context, and inside of this I am going to say react.createContext, and after this I am going to put a function app, and I'm going to remove the name form here and say app. Now right after this I'm going to open the brackets and give a return value, and inside of return I'm going to say number context dot provider, and there are two things. There's provider and consumer. I will get to it in a bit, and I'll give the value as 10. And here we won't be using props, so close this tag, and once you've closed it, give a div. Yeah, so here we won't be using any class or state or anything as such. So without that we will be passing the value. So I will give a display component. We haven't done it yet, but we will do it right here. So go ahead and create a function display component. So that will be display, and right inside of this I am going to say return, and inside of return I'm going to use the number context, and I am going to say consumer this time. So this is the provider and this will consume the value, so this is the consumer, and inside of this I am going to access the value inside of my, it's inside of the it's like a argument, a parameter, and here I am going to give a div, and inside of the div I am going to say the answer to this is value. Alright, so let's save this. Once we have saved this, we can open our terminal and say new terminal. I have a few terminals running here, so let's go to the first one. So it has already ran and it says successful, there are no errors, so let's go check it up. So the answer to this is 10. Let's change this value a bit. Let's make this small, and inside of this I'm going to make this small as well. Okay, so here I am going to say 12, and let's see if that works, and let's save this, and yes, the answer to this is 12. So let me explain what's happening right here. Now let's break it down, and first let's below here I'm talking about this line, number line 4. Below we are creating a context called number context. It is meant to return an object with two values, that is the provider and the consumer. It is meant to return us these two objects, these two values. Now then we use the provider value that was returned from the number context. We are using the provider value that is returned from the number context. We created to make particular value available to all the children. So what we are doing here is inside the provider the value is 12. So we created to make a particular value, that is this value 12, available to all the children values. Now with that we can use the consumer value that was returned from the number context. So again the number context will return consumer, and the number context we created get the value made available to the children. So it gets this value, this number context will return it. So if you have noticed, this component did not get any props. We did not use any props here. Now note how we were able to get the value from app component into the display component by wrapping our content in number context.consumer and using the render props method to retrieve the value here and render it. Everything works well, and the render props method we used is a really good pattern for handling dynamic data. Now let's use the use context method. So go up above and here in React put a comma and open the brackets and say use context, and now we can use it here because we have imported the library, we have imported use context hook. So how do we use it? So in function display we shall remove the number context consumer at the tag, and we shall also remove this. We'll write it again. So inside the return state we'll put a statement so called const value, and inside of this value we will store saying use context, and here we will be calling the number context. So that's the argument. So what use context number context does is, that's all we need to in order to display our value. You can use the use context hook and pass in the context object, that is 12 we created, and grab the value from it. We can access this and we can use we can access number context and grab the value 12. First let's display this. So it will return div. So this just makes it so much more simpler, right? Instead of doing all that, we can just do this. It's just so much more easier. So that's why hooks was introduced. So the answer to this is value. If you can observe right here, there's an other return. We can remove this. Now you can see it lights up, and we have to remove this bracket as well. So that's about it. We can save it. I hope there are no errors. There seems to be no errors. So let's go and check it out. So the answer to this is 12. We have used use context. Let's see by changing our value, and that will be to 80. Let's save this, and we have successfully used use context to change. We can to get the value from another component to a component. So that's the advantage of use context hook. Now we will be talking about our last and the final hook that we will be talking about. There are many other hooks, but these are the basics to need to know to apply in your projects. These are just the basics. There are many more APIs of hooks. So the next one we'll be seeing is use reducer.